Today's episode of Back to the Roots podcast is brought to you by Albert Lee Seed. Here at Back to the Roots, it is our goal to create connections with organic farmers across the country. Now we'd like to connect you with a leading provider of organic and non-GMO farm seed in Albert Lee Seed. Cover crops, forages, small grains, corn, and soybeans. Albert Lee Seed is helping organic and transitioning farmers diversify their crop rotations and create healthy herds, healthy soil, and healthy humans. Whether you're looking for organic oats for cover cropping, highly digestible alfalfa, or a 105-day non-GMO corn hybrid, Albert Lee has got you covered. In fact, they were the first farm seed company in the industry to offer guaranteed levels of non-GMO purity in their Viking corn and soybean line. Check out their website at www.alseed.com to see their farm seed lineup or to request a catalog. And thank you to Albert Lee Seed.
You're listening to Back to the Roots podcast. I'm Mike Klein, and along with Brian Wood, we are joined today on the east side of Cleveland by Nathan Rutz and Michael Robinson from Rust Belt Riders, an urban composting company. And I want to welcome you guys and thank you for joining us today. And can you just give us a little bit of a background and what got you into this?
Yeah, thanks for having us. So the company was started about 5 years ago. It was the other Daniel Brown and myself had known each other in Chicago, and he'd moved back to Cleveland after we both graduated from going to school in Chicago. He's originally from here, and I'm originally from Illinois. So I was actually he had moved back to Cleveland, and I was on a bicycle trip from Chicago. The end destination was supposed to be Philadelphia. And we ran into some equipment problems with our bicycles outside of Cleveland, so I knew that he was here at the time, and I gave him a call, and they drove out and picked us up, my friend and I, on our bikes, and we came back to Cleveland. And I got a tour of the city. It was amazing. Saw a lot of the community gardens that were set up here. Had a really great camping trip. We went a little bit outside of the city, did some camping, and he had a community garden really close to where we're at today. And he made kind of half joke of an offer like, hey, you know what, you want to come move back in the springtime? We could use some help on the community garden. There were already two people staying in a one-bedroom apartment. He said, you can move into the attic if you want. You live in the attic and, work on the community garden. So working on the community gardens and seeing the help that the soils needed. A lot of the community gardens are on properties that were formerly foreclosed houses that had been demoed and then filled in, and there's just a really low-quality soil on those plots. So we were also working in the service industry, so we were working at some farm-to-table restaurant. Spice Kitchen and Bar had just opened right about the time that we started.
And this is Nathan. I was going to add that at the same time that Michael moved to Cleveland, and I was working at an environmental group, and Michael came and worked at that environmental group for a little while. Yeah. And that's based in downtown Cleveland. We were doing some anti-fracking work, going and visiting the Ohio legislature. And at the same time, I had started, about the same week that Michael and Dan started doing bicycle hauling, I started picking up coffee grounds from coffee shops downtown because I bought a house in Cleveland, on the east side of Cleveland, that has very high lead in the soil. And so it's like, okay, I'll buy some soil. So I bought some soil from a landscape supply company. And when they delivered it, I was really excited until I saw it because it was mostly clay and garbage. Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay, I'll make compost.
Yeah, and it was working with that organization that Nathan was with at the time that actually was it gave me the green light to be able to move here because I was able to line that job up before I got here. So yeah, we were working on the anti-fracking stuff, and then Dan and I were both working in the restaurant and saw the food scraps coming out of the restaurant, and also knew that the soil needed help on the community garden. So we raised a little bit of money from family and friends and purchased a bicycle and a bicycle trailer, and we were hauling food scraps from coffee coffee shops, juice bars, and restaurants to the closest community garden with a bicycle and a bicycle trailer, about 300 pounds at a time. That lasted for almost a year, and we started to see more demand for the services and knew that we'd have to change up our hauling methods in order to scale with the demand. So today we haul about 160,000 pounds a month from about 140 different locations around the city.
Yeah, and then I started off making really bad compost in my backyard. I thought, okay, I got coffee grounds, I got filters, that's carbon or nitrogen. Turned out that was not the case. And I was just piling them up. And one day I dug into that stuff, and it was bluish and smelled really strange. I called up my brother, who was a senior in soil science at North Carolina State, and he couldn't tell me anything about making compost, even though he had taken all the agroecology courses that they offered. And that's when I really discovered what goes on at land grants. In at least in undergrad education. And eventually found Dr. Lane Ingham's compost course, and I took that, started making much better compost, started looking at stuff under the microscope, started really seeing results with plants from making good compost. And
it's probably about a year and a half into when we were hauling on bicycles. We'd just started moving over to box trucks and cargo vans, and I remember running into Nathan at one of the coffee shops that we actually service. And this was before we were working together. Nathan was kind of doing this stuff kind of separately at the time. Yeah. And we actually just got back yesterday from the Cultivating Community Composting Forum, which is a bunch of composting companies that come to their work from a place of social justice and food sovereignty, ecology. And that conference was about to happen, so I asked Nathan if he wanted to come to this conference in L.A., and Nathan came to L.A. At the coffee shop. He mentioned that he was taking this awesome course with Elaine Ingham and learning about about soil biology. And at the time, I was still working on the logistics of our hauling, the hauling piece of our company. So Nathan was already heading down the path of having an incredible understanding of compost production and soil biology. But he said, hey, I learned of this other course through MIT that's going on that you can take online, and it's logistics and supply chain management. So I took the logistics and supply chain management course through MIT, and Nathan was taking Dr. Elaine Ingham's course on soil biology and compost production. We went to LA, had a great time, and then shortly after that, Nathan started working with us in the team.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how many people are a part of the team now?
There are 5 of us full-time. 5 full-time altogether. We have 2 part-time and then 4 full-time that are here.
And do you retail or wholesale your product, or both?
We're exploring that right now. This is the first year that we've had potting soil blends or any soil blend to bring to market. So a big piece of this summer and this growing season for us is learning who wants which product, how big of a package do they like that product in. Product market fit is really what we're working on this year.
Who is our product for?
Mm-hmm.
So are growers going to buy it? Are we going to be able to sell out of it just in Cuyahoga County? Because Cuyahoga County, I believe, is still the most populous county in Ohio, although Franklin's probably coming up quick. And it seemed possible from our small scale that, if we did it right, we could sell it all right here. But if people want it for transplants in transplant production, we'd be happy to provide that also.
So we're tracking that really closely right now, exploring all those different things. You can currently get it through the website. You can order it, and we'll either deliver it to you, or we can ship it to you, or you can come pick it up. And then it's available in a couple of different shops as well.
We should mention, because Mike, you mentioned that you visited the website. We have 2 websites. Yeah. Because we have a website for our hauling services. So Rust Belt Riders is the hauling services, and we decided to split the brand for our potting soil to being Tilth Soil, because every single time you say Rust Belt Riders, if you're not already familiar with us, we have to explain it, whereas Tilth Soil is a little more obvious. And so we wanted to split that so it wouldn't be as confusing on the website. So you go to this website, and are you signing up to have food scraps picked up from your office building, or am I buying potting soil? And so we made 2 websites.
Yeah. So tilthsoil.com is the soil blend website.
Okay. So you on picking up the scrap, the Rust Belt Riders side of the business, is this a service that restaurants sign up and then pay a monthly fee for you to pick up the product? Then you get paid to take the product.
Yes.
And then you turn it into the different potting soils and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yep.
I just think it's crazy the amount of food waste in restaurants. And to see what we walked around before we started outside, and to see what you're doing with it, that's really neat.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, the one of the things we work really hard to do is we meticulously track data, and we provide reports to everyone that we work with, because most of the organizations that work with us that are diverting their food scraps from landfills, preventing those greenhouse gases that would be given off by that material going to the landfill, a lot of them have sustainability goals and metrics that they want to meet, and they want to be able to talk about the community benefit that they're providing, the beneficial externalities of the service, and we track that data and give them access to their reports so that they can do reporting to their stakeholders to show the value of diverting the food scraps from the landfills, and helping to have that contribute to growing more food and water retention, things like that.
Last year we did over 1 million pounds of food scrap diversion, but based on a calculation, an average of per population of how much food waste is generated, we probably did less than 1% of Cuyahoga County's food scraps last year.
No
and
kidding.
That was over 1 million pounds.
Wow. And you don't process all that yourself, correct?
That's correct. So everything we pick up gets composted. But we work with 4 or 5 other partners to make sure everything gets composted, because we're on a small site here in the city, and we don't have the land capacity to compost all that right here. So we do work with we work with Case Western Reserve University, and they have a farm. We haul the stuff from their campus to their farm, and they compost it there. There's a couple well-managed community gardens, like the Ben Franklin Garden is a really cool community garden on the west side of Cleveland that's been around at least since the mid-'80s. It's 5 acres, and it's an impressive operation. And there's Stearns Farm in Parma. We bring some material there. We have a slower windrows there than our actively turned hot piles here. And then we work with a regulated Class 2 facility to take all the rest of the stuff.
And then a farm school also.
Yeah, I forgot to mention them.
Yeah, Kelly's.
Cool. Yeah, they're awesome.
So going from the 160,000 pounds a week, right?
160,000 a month.
A month.
Yeah.
So you bring that all to these different sites and go through the process of taking that raw food scrap and turning it into what your final product is.
Yeah, so we pick up from the back or the front of all these restaurants and grocery stores and juice bars and coffee shops in 64-gallon totes. They're on wheels, so we can pull them around because they can get up to 350 pounds sometimes. And we line each of those toters with a non-GMO compostable corn-based bag. And we collect all that stuff in our box trucks. We use a lift gate, which is great. And then we drop it off. So I'll describe what we do here. We drop it on a pad of wood chips. We wet the wood chips with dechlorinated water. We use a sprinkler to wet up the chips. We get those wood chips from a tree service. They do mostly branch chipping, so it's like line clearing and things like that. And we really like those branch chips because it's that smaller, more nitrogenous wood, so it's not heartwood with the 1,000 to 1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. It's more like 80 to 200 to 1 carbon to nitrogen. So we get those branch chips, mix it with the food scraps at about a 1.5 to 1 wood chips to food scraps ratio. And then we fold that together. We just do pad mixing with a loader. The microorganisms on the food scraps, and also we add about 5 to 10% by volume finished compost to a fresh pile for inoculation. And then that comes up to temperature, usually within 2 to 3 days. By up to temperature, I mean above 131 Fahrenheit. And then we have a set of parameters that we follow to decide when to turn it. So if it's been between 100, it's the National Organic Program standard. So between 131, 140 for 72 hours, 140 to 150, 48 hours, 150, 160, 24 hours, 160 plus 24 hours or less. And then we turn it with the loader to mix the material, get all the cold parts of the pile on the inside of the pile. We check the moisture by squeezing the material, or at this point I can guess it by sight because I've turned so many piles. And then we wet the material if it needs to with the sprinkler. If it's really, really, really hot, and we can't turn it that day, I'll come through with a broom handle and poke holes in it so it can vent steam out of it. That's the thing that actually comes from biodynamic composting, is poking holes in an excessively hot pile.
Because it can get too hot.
So this is a point of contention among composters. No one really knows or has very strong evidence of too hot. So you don't want it. The worst possible case scenario would be it gets really screaming hot, like 185, and then goes anaerobic and produces alcohols and then catches fire. So that's the thing you really
Try to
don't
avoid that. Yeah.
We've never had that happen. And I don't know of any composters who've had spontaneous combustion, but you hear about it occasionally in haylofts, but never seen that happen.
And are you looking at temperature? Like you said, there's a lot of debate on if too hot.
Right.
Is the argument that it can get too hot that some bacteria are being killed off in that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the composting process, it's kind of divided into temperature zones. There's mesophilic, which is medium temperature, and thermophilic, which is the hot temperatures. And there are tens of thousands of organisms that can grow in compost piles, tens of thousands of species of bacteria and fungi and protozoa, nematodes, actinobacteria, and they all serve different purposes in the soil food web. And the fear, if you get too hot, is that you're going to kill a lot of the beneficials, even if those beneficials have gone to sleep and are dormant, especially mycorrhizal spores, because there's a known heat death point of mycorrhizal spores, or assumed to be known. And because we do see mycorrhizal spores in our compost, but the thing about mycorrhizal fungi is that they only grow in the presence of a living plant root. So you can't grow mycorrhizal fungi in compost piles. You can only grow saprotrophic fungi. That's the wood eaters, the decomposers in compost piles. So that's the fear. But what can happen is a purpose of aging compost, once it comes down in temperature, is for reinoculation by beneficial organisms. Because during the really hot phases, it's only thermophilic bacteria and archaea that are doing anything in the pile. So once it cools back down, that's when the other organisms wake back up from their dormant state when they're in a cyst or spore form, and start eating the leftovers from the bacterial thermophilic party that just has been coming down in temperature. Because nematodes, those microscopic worms, eat bacteria, fungi. We mostly hear about root feeders, but there are mostly not detrimental nematodes in soil. So those come back in once the temperature is more toward ambient. You get worms moving in. So you have reinoculation after it's like sanitized, not sterilized, because obviously it's not sterile because the heat comes from microorganisms. But the fear with too hot is that you're going to kill beneficials. But I have personally seen under the microscope plenty of nematodes and a diversity of fungus in compost that got to 160, 170.
Interesting. It sounds like as we were walking around, we were talking about in a tablespoon of your compost. Quote those numbers again.
Yeah. So the potential, we haven't sent our compost off for a DNA test, and the problem with DNA tests is that there are a lot of them, just like soil tests, like soil chemistry tests, and nobody exactly agrees on what they mean or how you should do them. But one thought is that there should be about 75,000 species of bacteria and 25,000 species of fungi in a tablespoon of soil.
Mm-hmm.
So just a bewildering diversity.
Well, and I think one of the things, not having a background in organic chemistry myself, it can be totally overwhelming to start talk about all the different nematodes and bacteria, but the one thing that in my simple brain, I've simplified it down to that the more the better. They're all feeding off of, they're all doing a different job, and providing something to that end product, which you're wearing a shirt today, feed people, not landfills, and I really appreciate that. And you're clearly taking a lot of care in making sure that your end product is something that will feed people.
Yes, absolutely. And I think another point to make about the compost and all those organisms, it can sound intimidating, but you think of it as a community. And I've enjoyed interviews you guys have done with people about community, and the different folks have different roles within a community, and it's the same way with all the organisms in a compost pile and in soil.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you think of the compost pile as a neighborhood or as a city, there's a lot of different roles that need to be played in that place to make it function. And so it's not as crazy as it might seem when you start naming all the like Latin names of things.
Right. Yep.
And when you look at that, there's different roles for everyone, and some of them get more recognition than others, yet the ones without the recognition are just as important to the whole thing.
Absolutely.
So back to, we interrupted, you're in the process, you've got it heated up to whatever temperature, you turned it.
Yep.
Now where do we go?
So you got to turn it a number of times until it starts to cool off. And you turn for a couple reasons. It's to get air back into the pile, because you really want most of the compost to be aerobic, breathing oxygen. And it's also to mix all the parts of the pile, because you don't want a random avocado pit to not get hot and be carrying some disease organism on it, or you don't want any seeds. So if you've got peppers or tomatoes in there, if we're selling our potting soil, we can't be having volunteer tomatoes popping out of the stuff. So that's another reason for the temperature and the turning. So we turn usually about 10 times in about 35 days, and it starts coming down in temperature. Then it goes over to our wall of compost, and it sits there for usually 3 to 5 months, and then worms move in. I might have thrown a few red wigglers out there like last winter to see if they would survive, and they sure survived. You saw in that handful of compost that there's a whole community in there.
Mm-hmm.
So the worms do their work on it, and then we bring the compost inside. We look at the weather, because if it's wet, it's a pain to screen. So we bring in the compost, let it dry out a little bit if it's been really wet out. Then we put it through our homemade sifting system, and we sift it down to a 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch. We have one screen above another, one half-inch screen above the 1/4 inch screen, so we get 3 sizes at the same time because they're angled. And then we blend the 1/4 inch screened compost with a number of ingredients: peat moss, coconut fibers, sand, perlite, blood, bone, gypsum, azomite, and kelp. And then that recomposts with the addition of those nitrogenous materials, and we turn and mix the potting soil for about a week to a week and a half, and then we bag it. We bag it by hand right now.
A labor of love.
Yeah.
But you said been doing this for about 5 years, and this, did I hear you correct that this is the first year that you'll have a actual, we're sitting next to the bags here, that you'll have the end product for sale?
So we had just unscreened compost for sale last year, but this is the first year that we'll have soil blends for different uses.
Okay.
Yeah, we figured that. So in the city, we had a couple dilemmas. We're such a small site that we can't make compost at a cheap enough price that any broad-scale farmer can use it in large quantities. And a lot of urban and suburban gardeners don't know what to do with compost. So we decided we would try blending it into potting soil, because lots of people buy potting soils.
But you would have bulk available in large quantities or larger quantities.
Yeah, we
unscreened.
We have a few customers that buy unscreened compost. We even have a few customers, a dahlia grower who's bought 3 yards of potting soil from us.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's available by the cubic yard if you give us a call. It's on the website. It's 40 and 10 quart bags, but we're working with people to fill interest in cubic yard orders as well. And once we move to a larger site, we're really excited to be able to scale that up and be providing larger bulk orders to farmers.
Now, Nathan, behind you is Lettuce Tree Farms, and you gave us a little bit of a tour through there. Can you kind of, and Michael, you mentioned, kind of the big picture vision of what you're doing to close the loop. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we want to, again, feed people, not landfills. and our friend Jeff used to do some hauling with us, and now he has his own business where he's growing microgreens in a 50-50 blend of peat and our compost, the finely sifted stuff. And then he sells those microgreens back to the restaurants that we picked up the food scraps from in the first place, and that's pretty neat. I think our longer-term vision would be to be an unfair advantage for regenerative agriculture in Northeast Ohio, so that we see this virtuous cycle developing where we work with more producers of food scraps, and then we can work with more growers of regeneratively grown food. And we want to see that throughout the city, because here in the Rust Belt and the southern Great Lakes, we have all this vacant land that needs help, needs remediation, and could be used for growing delicious, healthy, nutrient-dense food right here in the city close to consumers. And, of course, in the rural areas where soil biology has been abused by compaction and tillage and chemicals for decades.
I think what we see here, what we're doing right now, is kind of just the tip of the iceberg. We come to the work from a place of wanting to, using systems thinking to be able to see how all of these things are connected, and then diverting food waste from landfills and putting it towards making soil blend to cultivate more food was the first step towards that regenerative system, thinking in circular economies and closed loop systems. So right now we're mostly diverting food scraps from landfills and making that into compost, but what we're doing is a really long play, and we started with something that was very actionable. Started on bicycles. We could really kind of get our hands dirty and get things rolling. But the more that we've learned about the work, and I think another reason that we've chosen this as the place to start is it's such a high leverage point in having benefit to other pieces of the system. So increasing water retention in the soils, the greenhouse gas mitigation, and then having this compost go towards local food production, specifically with the community gardens that we work with. A lot of those gardens, it's free, so you can just grow your food on what was formerly a vacant house lot, and you can grow your food there, and there's free food being provided for that community. So we've thought a lot about our work as going deeper and not wider. So we've been asked, when do you want to come to Cincinnati? Are you looking at coming to Pittsburgh? What do we need to do to get you guys out in Pittsburgh? And we love talking to folks that are interested in doing that in their own cities, but for us it's about, again, community connections. We're where we are today because of the network that we have in the everything from farm to table to the different cafes and restaurants. I mean, it's this community of people that are working towards building the world that we want to see, the world that we want to live in, and that's a much longer play, but going deeper and not wider is what's important to us. And I think you mentioned lettuce tree is a really good example of that. That's the first, it's small, but it's the first example that we have of having a sandwich shop. Urban Twine, for example, composts the vegetable scraps from their kitchen with us. We compost those, and then Jeff at Lettuce Tree is growing sprouts in the compost, and those sprouts wind up back on the sandwiches at that sandwich shop. So it's a small example, but it's the first example that we have of a totally closed loop system.
One way I like to think of it is as mycorrhizal economics.
I like that term.
Yeah.
But a couple of thoughts on what you said there. You've had people approach you that, when are you coming to Cincinnati? When are you coming to this city, that city? One thing I think is neat is that you're setting up a model that other communities can follow, not necessarily something that you have to then go out and do. But then the second part would be, one of the things that we see working out on the rural landscape quite a bit is that a lot of the rural communities are losing people to coming to work in the city. That's where the jobs are. And I think there's a lot of frustration amongst rural communities that they're losing their young people. And, there's many different things that we can talk about. Community is a big part of it, that reason why it's happening. But it's really encouraging that you guys are trying to recreate that. I think another frustration that I didn't mention there is that people don't know where their food comes from. People don't understand what it takes to actually grow a tomato or an animal or get milk, that kind of thing. And you're starting at the very base here. Like, okay, here is the soil. You can't grow it because that site is contaminated with lead, but here is soil that you can grow a tomato plant.
Yeah.
It's pretty neat.
Yeah.
Because as your long-term vision, like you say, deeper, once you have the thing in motion, let's fast forward 10 years or whatever it may be, you have a model now that you can help other communities, just like Brian said, do the similar thing, unless you then want to broaden it. But I really like what you said about let's go deeper and not try to spread out and be as big as we can. Let's get the model figured out. It's really neat.
It's also important to us that we're a for-profit. A lot of us have worked in nonprofits, which can be really great, but we want to be able to provide sustained income at at least reasonable living wage for people wherever this model comes to be.
And I think that's the other important part is if the model is being developed in the Midwest here, in the Rust Belt, and we just came back from this conference where you've got people from New York City, and there are a whole bunch of people from New York City, and there are a whole bunch of people from California and LA, and they're building their own models out. And they're really cool models, but there's a big difference in terms of the economic context in which we're all working. The East Coast is running out of space for landfills. That's driving up their tipping fees at landfills. The West Coast just has really progressive policy around material going to landfills. So in the absence of either of those things here, economic incentive or just policy banning, these practices that are having these detrimental effects, we're still here. We ought not be here. Our business shouldn't exist if you've got your Adam Smith hat on. It doesn't check out.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're showing is that you can prove the value of doing the right thing and using regenerative practices in ways that are a little bit more difficult to quantify, but equally important. I think externalities are something that we're really trying to capture to be able to display the true cost of waste and the true benefit of the regenerative system. So one number we like to use is the ReFed report that came out a few years ago said $218 billion is wasted every year on the cultivation, processing, transportation, and disposal of food that's never eaten. All while 1 in 6 kids in our region go hungry. So that's one of the issues that we're working on. And I think, that having our model be built in this economic context means if it can work here, it's definitely going to work in places that have policy, but it's also going to work in places that don't have those progressive policies or don't have the same economics around their tipping fees.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about, the closed loop, food waste into Sprouts, back to the sandwich shop, I look at it a little bit like the small dairy farm, where that's a closed system because you've got the manure for the fertilizer that grows the feed, that grows, so it's its own little micro closed system. And as soon as, which we talked with Todd a little bit last night about, what happens in agriculture when the animal is removed. Now you've got to try to close that loop by bringing something else in to replace the animal waste. And I hate to hear it called animal waste because it's not.
Right, yeah.
It's vitally important to building your soils and the organic system.
Absolutely. Sir Albert Howard said, nature does not grow without animals.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing that before you were talking about how people don't realize where the food is coming from. It's it just kind of the grocery store, right? It appears magically at the grocery store or something, right? And then we consume it, and then it gets thrown out in the end, or the packaging gets thrown out in the end. So I think another kind of zoomed out project that we're working on is changing the train of thought from the paradigm of a linear system to that circular system. So it comes from the ether and appears in the grocery store, and then when you don't eat it and it gets funky in the refrigerator, you toss it in this container where the trash fairy makes it disappear. That's not how it works. So in the same way that you were talking about how familiarizing people with where their food comes from, we also work really hard to help people realize that when you throw that in the trash can, it doesn't disappear. Which is why we like bringing people out to our site. I think that's something that's really special. A lot of composting facilities don't have the kind of open invitation that we do to have you come out and see what the process and stuff looks like. And I feel like that goes a long way in demystifying this so-called waste stream, because that's the paradigm shift, is you're no longer thinking about this as a waste stream that goes into the trash fairy bin. You're actually a steward of this resource, making sure that it goes back into a regenerative system.
And if absolutely nothing else, bringing them out here and just showing them the tip of the iceberg, when they do take that orange out of their refrigerator, they actually ask the question, where is this going?
Yeah.
Which is the point you were basically making there. But just to reiterate it, I mean, it's a strong point to be made there that like you said, the trash fairy, it's just gone. It just disappears. But back into the details a little bit on that trash, or I shouldn't call it trash, on the scraps that you guys receive. One of the things that we were talking about outside is that you receive a wide diversity of different types of food scraps, and you feel that's led to some of the success in actually being able to compost it, whereas previous people have tried to have large volumes of the same type of thing, and it's been detrimental. How do you balance that out? Do you have to make a concerted effort that you're balancing out the food scraps that you're using, or is it just kind of that's how it's coming in and you can just use it that way?
Lucky for us is just how it comes in. We can choose what we compost here on our own site, so we choose the stuff that we like the most, and the larger facility that we pay to take the stuff, we send them the stuff that may be less desirable in some ways. And we're really glad to have them there and that it's composted. But to make the best quality compost, it's just like on a farm where you have to have a cover crop cocktail. You don't want your cows, if you're on grass, just eating one species of grass. You need that diversity of species of grass. And so, in our compost, the food scraps we're getting coffee beans from all over the world. We're getting spent grain from breweries. That grain comes from the Midwest and Germany and Belgium. We're getting fruit from all over the world. We're getting
Fish heads
from Lake Erie. We're getting red peanut skins. We're getting coffee chaff. What's some other weird stuff we get? We get straw that has animal urine from the Cleveland Natural History Museum's various animals. So that's a lot of different feedstocks and a lot of different microbiomes on each of those things. From their places, and so we like to see that all together. And lucky for us, it's easy. I know it's a lot harder for some folks who are doing like manure and straw, because it's what they have.
And that's why I think like the pressure to scale. We are still operating on this very small facility after being around for a number of years, and I think the rate at which we've done this, while it has meant that we've had several side hustles in order to be able to continue to do this work, it's been worth it, because we've been able to, what we see out there is it's actually huge compared to the three bin pallet systems we used to use in turn with pitchforks. But it's only 500 square feet out there right now, and we've got a Bobcat. So it's huge relative to the old systems, but then we're looking at an 8-acre site, and that's a significant jump. But I feel really great about our craft now that we've been able to do a little bit more slow scaling, because I feel like when you try to make that jump before you're ready, or there's like a lot of pressure, I feel like, from a number of places that's pressuring you to hit this point of scale, that a lot of times can be really scary and put companies out of business, just because the business issues aside, if we went too early into hitting the green light on a number of these larger sources of nitrogen
Especially
feedstocks.
places that have meaty stuff,
there's
meaty
a.
wastes.
I feel like it would be pretty easy to screw that up and tick some neighbors off, and being great neighbors is really important to us. So I feel like the rate at which we've continued to grow to get on that site it has been good, but we definitely want to be able to get to a point where we can service the larger scale producers of
'cause
food scraps.
When you guys walked on, Mike, you mentioned that you thought it might be a little smelly, but you walked on the site.
No. On the way up, when we were driving up, I thought, boy, we're going to a big compost facility. I wonder if there's going to be a funky smell. You don't smell anything. It smells like compost.
Yeah.
You don't smell the composting process, I guess.
Yeah.
It's really impressive.
Yep. And I've been involved with some different operations that have scaled up too quickly. And
Ain't pretty.
it's not pretty at all. They've had to be, I know one of them down in Florida that we were working with that got shut down because of neighbor complaints due to smell, and they just could not control it, and it just got too far out of hand. And so you kind of were hinting at it, but in the slow scaling you mentioned, have you had to turn people away that would like to use your service and in order to maintain some sort of structure and control?
Yes. We actually turned away an opportunity that we really, really, really wanted, and it just wasn't the right timing for us. And I feel good about the decision that we made. We actually went back to them and said, "Hey, we would love to work with you in the future, and one of these days we're going to reach back out to you when we're ready. And this is really hard for us to do." But it was the wise decision to make, to say no to that. As badly as we wanted it and could have given it a shot, it wasn't worth the risks of having that go south. We have a really high level of service. When people think about composting food scraps at their grocery store, they're worried about it being a stinky mess. And the way that other companies have delivered the service in the past, you can't really blame them for that. So we always start with some of these accounts in this uphill battle where we talk to them about how being clean, time, and benefiting the community are the three kind of tenets that we use to live by to deliver that service. And we let them know we don't want to compromise the level of service that we deliver in the hauling piece, so we'll come back to you when we're ready and we feel better about this, and hopefully that's in our near future.
And that's got to be really tough, having the values that you guys have talked about that you have in building this company, in trying to keep food from going to a landfill and scraps going to a landfill, and then to have to turn it away. I'm sure that's a very tough thing to do, but you're doing it for the best interest of both yourself, your community, and everybody involved.
Yeah, and if we bite off more than we can chew and we get shut down for doing something silly or not being wise in what we decide to take on, then no food scraps are getting composted.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Then it was all for naught.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that's interesting about community also for us is like we had to have the time to develop a relationship with a tree service, for example, so we could have a consistent source of wood chips here on our site. And that took time, and we didn't have that when that proposal came through, and that would have meant we would have like doubled in a half overnight if we'd tried to do that, which I'm really glad we didn't. But now we've had enough time where we used to have to buy wood chips, which was a real drag, but now it's a benefit to a tree service to come and be able to drop them off here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what is the model of your business? You mentioned earlier that it is employee-owned.
Yeah, so
you're in the process of that?
Yeah, that's right. I think one of the so coming at the work from a place of building regenerative systems and helping connect people to their food waste, and to their land. That's a core kind of foundation of why we do the work, but also workplace democracy and worker ownership is also at the foundation of our operation, and we're really excited. We're in the process of finishing up redrafting the operating agreement so Jesse and Nathan have worked with us for the longest out of everybody on our team, so they'll have equity, and then the operating agreement will be restructured so that it's one worker owner, one vote, which some people would think we're out of our minds for doing something like that. But we believe that in order to create an environment where people are able to really be themselves in their work and see themselves in their work and be able to provide a soil blend to someone that they're proud of, that there's something inherently fulfilling about that work. To be able to have that is also why, for me at least, I'm really glad that I chose this to be the work that I was doing, but what I was doing was equally as important as how we were doing what we were doing as a team. And the workplace democracy and worker ownership is core values of our business.
I think a comparison there would be, again, going back to the farmers that we work with on a day-to-day basis. Some of them have employees that they hire, and a lot of the complaints we hear a lot is that those people that are coming to work on the farm, they don't own it. They're just there to shovel out the box stall, whatever it is. And once they get done, they are done. They're not looking to improve. And it sounds like that's kind of the model you want people to. And again, Mike and I, we work for a mission-driven company, and you're trying to do the same thing and give even more ownership in that they truly care what they're doing.
Yeah, I think one maybe something that is kind of the same is when you raise your own food, and when you eat the food that you raise, you put the hard work into it. It tastes better to you than it probably will to anybody else. And if you can take that same mindset to your job, where, like you said, you sell this bag of potting soil to somebody, you put your heart and soul in this, you are proud of it, and it is wonderful.
Yep.
And if you can get that value, that feeling of accomplishment to a worker, that's what it's about.
Yeah. And it feels great to be able to sell potting soil that I've spent a lot of time and effort trying to understand. I majored in philosophy, not soil science, and so I'm constantly learning. I'm always like, oh, do I know anything about anything? Probably not. But asking people for help is something I like to do, and so I've asked a lot of people for help, and a lot of people have helped. And so now we have this mix that works pretty darn well, and it's made from a lot of the stuff that we've kept out of landfills.
Mm-hmm.
I liked what you said when we were first walking around. You said there's no secrets. You'll tell us whatever we want to know about it.
Yeah.
And I love that. There's no proprietary. You've got this little secret blend to get that niche in the market. I love that. This is what it is.
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly what it is, partly because I think we've got a world to save and we don't have any time for proprietariness.
Yep. Yeah, I think the conference that we just got back from, again, is just a place where everybody's just sharing best practices, different ways of anything from, how you're accounting for different transactions in your finances to, the different techniques and methods that you use for making compost. I think that's a really significant thing in the community of, specifically this community of community composting companies that do this work, is everybody's always sharing things. And I think that in the same way that the diverse communities or diverse ecologies have resilience, this kind of niche in the industry because it's connected in so many different places, and there are so many different kinds of organizations that are sharing knowledge with one another. It creates a very resilient niche in the industry too.
Mm-hmm. And I want to go back again to the details a little bit, and it just reminded me when you said you're a philosophy major, and you said there are 5-6 people total on staff, and out of them there are 3 philosophy majors. Yep. So I'm just curious on the, it's what you're doing is very different than what a philosophy major probably pictures what they're going to be doing when they're at school. But the day-to-day hands-on, getting in a skid loader, building some of the stuff that we walked around and saw, just getting the knowledge. How do you do that? That can seem insurmountable to a lot of people.
I think that's why having a degree in philosophy is helpful.
Yeah,
because you think you can learn anything you want to. And I think something I'm kind of good at is asking for help, because in some points in philosophy you realize you don't know anything, or maybe it's not even possible to know things, and so acquiring knowledge is done by listening. For me right now, listening to podcasts, reading books. And once I've heard somebody on a podcast, I'm like, oh man, I need to talk to that person. I'll try to find their contact info and call them up and have a conversation. Done that a number of times. Mm-hmm. meeting people at conferences has been really great. Like, that's why we're having this conversation right now.
I think it's kind of funny how it's a small world. You talked to Ron Milner at the OFA conference. He gave me your contact information. We didn't realize anybody would listen to it, but you listened to it.
Oh, yeah. I've listened to every episode.
Cool.
Yeah.
And if you ever need contact information from somebody who's on our podcast, we'll gladly share all that.
Yeah. Cool.
So.
Yeah. So I'm another one of the 3 philosophy degrees, and I think just like Nathan was saying, like that love of learning and continuing to learn things, knowing what you don't know, I think philosophy is helpful in like getting you to think about how you're thinking. So if you can step outside of yourself and try to get an idea of what you don't know and then ask for help, I think has been really helpful to us. You mentioned the machines and I think using the machines, building the machines to do certain things that we want them to do. A lot of our day-to-day is just solving a series of problems.
Just like farmers.
Mm-hmm.
And coming to solving the problem from a place of systems thinking and trying to have an idea of how I guess when I say systems thinking, I mean, how is this thing connected to everything else in the system? So this is one component that when you change it, it's going to make other things change, and it might make unexpected changes and have ripple effects around. So I think that the way that we solve those problems kind of has that lens on it. And I also think, again, coming back to the way that we make decisions, right? So with one worker, one vote, we make decisions on consensus, and we're really small. So sometimes it takes a minute, but we're able to get everybody on the same page and make sure that everybody feels good about this decision, and that's how we can move forward. And for me, what I had studied really helps in the interpersonal world, and knowing about how different people kind of communicate, or how someone having that interpersonal perspective and thinking about subjectivities when we come to the work and solve the problems, I think is really helpful too.
What is a subjectivity?
Well, just your particular perspective and the lens with which you look at the world. So if we're working, really tightly with a close-knit team, and we've got a whole bunch of serious problems that we're working on and trying to solve day to day, having an understanding of how the different members of the team are going to be perceiving the world is really helpful, because then you can adjust how you're talking with people and working with people in a way that helps them to be able to continue to be themselves while they're at work.
Well, I just had to ask that question on the day-to-day type of stuff, and I appreciate the higher level view, and I just think of it because we work with farmers, and I didn't grow up on a farm, so I look at somebody and I can understand the systems, the higher level systems of, okay, why are they plowing? I can understand that. But if I get out in a tractor and I'm actually sitting at the edge of a field saying, okay, I need to plow this field, I'm going to look at it and say, now what in the world, where do I start?
Well, that's part of the reason we've grown slowly also, is the learning curve of making physical things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I love the fact that you build the screening machine yourself. I love that you figured out how to get it to work versus just, we need to spend $15,000 to buy this piece of equipment.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes maybe not having the capital available to do that will help you in the long run, because when you finally, like you talked about getting a bagger, you know how much you're going to appreciate that bagger because you were doing it by hand.
Yep.
So
yeah, necessity, the old mother of invention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You guys got anything else you want to make sure we touch on?
Well, we didn't really talk about the carbon, how composting is a benefit to soil carbon. And this is something that the folks at Advancing Eco-Agriculture talk a lot about. There's a feedback loop of healthy plants make healthy soil, makes healthy plants, makes healthy soil. And where do you intervene in that? Because a healthy plant is taking more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, making it into more sugar, squirting more sugar into the soil where it's being eaten and lived on and turned into soil organisms. And then some of those organisms make those stable compounds in the soil. The way, what AEA does is super cool, and they're intervening in that system by making healthy plants that are in soil that is less than ideal with all the foliar sprays. And so what we're trying to do from our side is make the soil better to have the healthier plant. So then that's our intervention point in that very simplified feedback loop of healthy plant and healthy soil.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that loop can also go from the soil to the plant to an animal back into the soil. So instead of just going through the plant and back in the soil, it actually goes through an animal, but still back into the soil.
Absolutely.
Because I don't think you can have that loop without starting at the soil.
You were talking about it's bad to get animals out of agriculture. Well, there is no agriculture without animals, at least the human animal.
Mm-hmm.
Which is the worst one.
Oh.
The hardest one to figure out, I guess.
Yeah. The only one that makes beer, though.
That's true.
We do have some redeeming qualities.
But there's all this manure, and we're not doing anything good with all this human manure right now. And even in apparently animal-less systems, there is at least the animal of the human. I mean, unless we get to total robot farms, but hopefully that's not going to happen. And reusing, like, a long vision for I would like to see is the composting of human manure, and seeing the value of human manure just like cow, chicken, pig, etc. manures, because there's no reason we shouldn't be returning those nutrients and life to the soil just like we are with all the others.
It is somewhat being done, but I know there was a farm in Maine that's using sludge. Mm-hmm. That then got shut. They found PFAS in the milk, right. And it's a cancer-causing agent, and this is a practice that's going on all around the country. So I'm sure that this whole spreading of sludge on farms is going to be reassessed again. So there's got to be a better way. I totally agree with it.
So like aerobic composting of human manure rather than spreading of commingled sewage sludge, which has all the industrial waste in it as well. Mm-hmm. I think is a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, if you open air compost the human waste, your neighbors might not be the happiest campers.
I don't know if I should tell you this, but I compost human manure at home.
And does it smell?
It does not smell.
Really?
You can get... Yeah, I can take you there right after this if you want.
I'm good.
Yeah, you can be 6 inches from the compost pile. It doesn't smell like anything. It's just the same principles as any other compost, of having the right carbon and nitrogen and covering your nitrogenous material with the carbon material. Just in western Pennsylvania is the mecca of human manure composting, where Joe Jenkins is the author of the Human Manure Handbook. Is now in its 4th edition, and that's read that book, you'll understand how it works. It's way simpler than I ever thought it could be.
Interesting.
Because if you look at the amount of nutrients that aren't being utilized when you look at the human population, I guess I never even thought about that aspect.
Yeah, it's totally crazy.
Yeah.
It's just part of the way we're trying to see value, see things as squandered resources rather than as wastes.
Mm-hmm.
And just keep looking around, keep thinking about everything that you interact with in a day.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys want to talk a little bit about your websites, the 2 different websites, and plug those a little bit so people can get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got rustbeltriders.com. That's where we have all the information about hauling services, education. So if you want us to pick up from a restaurant or grocery store, etc., or in the future when we get into residential pickup, which is something we're going to be doing later this year, that'll be at rustbeltriders.com. We also give workshops.
And then you can sign up for our community-supported composting program as well. It's kind of an interim solution for folks that want to compost their food scraps that they generate at home. That's on the rustbeltriders.com website. You can sign up, and basically it's $5 a month, and you have access to our drop site. So you can bring your food scraps to our site, and we'll compost them for you. And that's kind of our interim solution until we get to doing curbside residential pickup. We also just started a drop-off location at the Shaker Nature Center. So you can bring your scraps over there as well. That'll probably be up and running if it's not green
this
light.
Week, if not
it's
next week, yeah.
Probably within a couple weeks. So you can sign up there on the Rust Belt Riders site.
Yeah, we do workshops almost monthly on different compost or regenerative agriculture topics. And then the other website is tilthsoil.com, and Tilth Soil is our potting soil brand. We wanted to distinguish between our pickup services and our potting soils so that it wasn't as confusing, and people can order for pickup from our location, or we can deliver in Cuyahoga County.
Okay.
Very
And
cool.
if you're outside of Cuyahoga County, we'd love to talk to you also.
Okay. Well, guys, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down. This is really interesting to me because the composting side is something that I guess I never really paid attention to it other than, on a large scale on a farm. So really interesting. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.